Hello, my witchy friends. It's Victory Witch ASMR. And today, I'd like for you to join me for a sleepy, witchy flip through of this massive book by Christopher Dell, titled The Occult, Witchcraft and Magic, an Illustrated History. I am a witchcraft historian, and so I do lots of videos on books like this and on literature and history surrounding witches and magic. So if you're new here, please do subscribe and join the coven. We are a very friendly and welcoming bunch. And please do consider stepping into the magic circle by joining my Patreon. We've made a lovely community of patrons on the platform. You can unlock dozens of ad-free videos, audios, spell recipes, historical facts, and more updates on my life just by joining for the cost of a nice cup of coffee per month. I really appreciate my patron support. It's made me able to keep making videos. So I'd love to see you there. So this book has a really beautiful spine. You can see that it's set in white. It's really beautiful white spine. And an interesting feature of this book is that it has a slipcover, and underneath the book is just red. So it's really pretty. You can kind of make the decision whether you want a red book on your shelf or a black one. I like the dark one, so that's what I'll keep it as. But as you open it up here, you can see there's this famous engraving of the witches and the devil. And this painting as well. And there is an extensive table of contents. So section 1 contains some sections on ancient magic. Then number 2 is Greek and Roman magic. Number 3 is Northern magic. Number 4 is medieval magic. Number 5 is Renaissance magic. Number 6 is just called World of Magic. Number 7, Enlightenment magic. Number 8, the Magic Revival. And number 9 is Modern magic. So we'll just flip through, mostly focusing on the beautiful full color images and illustrations. So first in the introduction, we have a depiction of a magical ceremony from the 19th century. The caption underneath reads, "Such were the mystic rites, ceremonies, and incantations used by the ancient theurgists to burst asunder the bonds of natural order and to obtain an artful intercourse with the world of spirits." We have a shaman's mask And we have a picture of people seeking the alchemical white. And this talisman image, an 18th century astrological diagram showing talismans and magical images made from the 28 mansions of the moon, and then also Raphael's 16th century depiction of the vision of the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel. 1001 Nights and fortune tellers. A palm here. We also have Goya's very eerie painting of witches in flight. That's in the Enlightenment. Sir Isaac Newton, renowned as a scientist, was also a passionate occultist who put together a large library of magic. And then here is a really interesting diagram. The Tree of the Soul. It's a diagram exploring how the physical and metaphysical worlds relate to one another. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4 layers to the Tree of the Soul. Then we also have this quote-unquote magical game from 19th century France. It reflects the growing popular interest in divination and the spiritual, or magic centered in the mainstream. And here begins the first chapter on ancient magic. And this is a painting with the biblical Witch of Endor right there, seated on an oval throne and surrounded by creatures. She's visited by Saul, who wishes to converse with the dead prophet Samuel. It talks about how magical thinking has been traced back as far as ancient cave paintings, such as this one. And then it gives a couple examples of that. Pillars of Horus, Bronze Age illustrations, Mesopotamian magic. This is a depiction of a mysterious magical figure, sometimes called the Queen of the Night from Babylon. It's very unlikely that I'll make my way all the way through this book, but I'll probably post a part 2 on Patreon, so look out for that. So we have a tablet from ancient Mesopotamia, a 19th century engraving of a king divining the future, the Roman god of eternity, Ion, who stands in a sphere decorated with zodiac signs, while the barren leafy trees stand for summer and winter, respectively. The 4 children possibly represent the 4 seasons. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. I think those are the children. They're smaller anyway. This is really neat. It's a 19th century illustration of the Dendera zodiac, a bas-relief on the ceiling of the Hathor temple at Dendera in Egypt. It is the only complete map of the ancient skies to have survived. It dates from around 50 BC. About bodies in astrology, Brahmin astrologers, ancient Egyptian magic. How neat is that? A papyrus containing magical spells. The Eye of Horus was a powerful symbol in ancient Egypt, used to ward off evil and for protection in the afterlife. So this is like an enlarged detail from a tomb painting of sorts. We also have the Ebers papyrus or Ebers. I'm not certain. And lots of things on amulets. And here's a whole section on amulets and talismans. Amulets are among the earliest examples of magical thinking and can be found in all parts of the world. Designed to ward off evil, they are either carried or worn. In his natural history. Okay, yeah, so lots of different references, and I see a reference to toadstones, which I am very familiar with. They are believed to come from the heads of old toads and were supposed to be effective against poisons. We have a necklace of glass beads, an elaborately drawn 18th century Sudanese talisman, more amulets, a wax tablet seal. I wonder, there's something like this at the British Museum that I have seen. It's looking familiar. There were lots of wax seal, amulets, but I don't know, that one is looking particularly familiar to me. The British Museum has a really excellent selection of ancient magic stuff. So if you ever want to see that kind of thing, that is the place to go. Of course, magic in the Old Testament. Saul, the Witch of Endor, trying to get Samuel to communicate from the land of the dead. King Solomon, ancient Chinese magic. They use the phrase magical thinking a lot, which I really like, that idea that even in ancient times, there were signs of people thinking magically, thinking in such a way. Okay, so really beautiful art. Oh my gosh, here's one of my all-time favorite pieces of art. This is a painting by John William Waterhouse, and it's of Circe, who brandishes a large wand while offering a cup to Odysseus. He's pictured in the mirror, so you can't really see him, but he's kind of off to the side. And it's a scene from Homer's Odyssey. Circe uses her wand to turn Odysseus's men into animals. And above, we've got wands from ancient Egypt, carved with deities and mythical creatures and things. And here's another painting of Circe, another absolute favorite, and it aligns with the discussion of Greek and Roman magic. When looking at the cultures of ancient Greece and Rome, it is difficult to determine where religion and mythology end and magic begins. Classical myths tend to be overtly magical, much more so, for example, than the stories of the Old Testament. Through divine intervention, things of this world change form and take on supernatural qualities. The Roman poet Ovid, in his Metamorphosis, beautifully captures this world, one in constant magical flux. In ancient Greece, the concept of magic stemmed largely from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the cultures of the Eastern Mediterranean. Indeed, the Greek word magikos comes from magos. Okay. And so, it says for the ancient Greeks and Romans, Egypt was an exotic place full of magic. Here, the moon goddess Io is welcomed into Egypt. Lots of examples of magic, according to Ovid, when the peasants of Lycia attempted to prevent the Greek goddess Leto from drinking from their well, she turned them into frogs. Yes, Hecate. Described by the classical poet Sappho as Queen of Night, Hecate was the principal goddess of magic, as well as the goddess of crossroads and the dark phase of the moon. She was the daughter of Perseus and Asteria. Ordinary Greeks worshipped Hecate as a household goddess, with shrines dedicated to her placed at doorways in the hope of keeping away the spirits of the dead. Once a month, in order to placate Hecate and the restless dead in her care, Greeks celebrated the Deipnon, a meal laid out at a crossroads on a night with no moon. Often, Hecate is depicted as a triple-faced entity, looking in three directions, in part because statues of her were placed at three-way crossroads. Fascinating. Sometimes she is also depicted as a dog, an animal that was regularly sacrificed in her honor. Hecate's equivalent in the Roman pantheon was the goddess Trivia, the goddess of crossroads, ghosts, and witchcraft. The name Trivia means three roads, another reference to crossroads at which sacrifices in her honor would take place. And she's become, of course, a figure in neo-paganism. It is worth noting that crossroads continue to have a close association with magic. Spells, incantations, and magic words. All magic relies on language in one form or another, which is to say, ritual by itself is rarely enough to effect change. Rather, it needs to be accompanied by an incantation or spell. And we've got some observations from English occultist Francis Barrett, who explains that the virtue of man's words are so great that when pronounced with a fervent constancy of the mind, they're able to subvert nature, to cause earthquakes, storms, and tempests. Almost all charms are impotent without words. So that words are the speech of the speaker, and the image of the thing signified or spoken of. So we have a witch casting a spell in a beautiful cauldron. A dramatic depiction of an incantation for raising the dead. And here's another Circe painting. It says, Circe is a Greek goddess of magic, sometimes also called a witch, the daughter of the sun god Helios. She was the sister of Aides. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The first written reference to Circe appears in Homer's epic poem, the Odyssey. According to Greek mythology, Circe lives on the island of Aea in a house in a clearing in a wood, a trope common to depictions of witches. When she meets Odysseus and his men, she attempts to drug them. Odysseus protects himself with a herb, but his men are turned into animals. We have some more depictions of magic in ancient Rome. Interesting. Greek magical papyri, love magic. This is another famous pre-Raphaelite painting that I love. You see that beautiful, like, spell bottle off to the side. But pre-Raphaelite art has some of the most gorgeous depictions of witchcraft I've ever seen. Moving along here. I love the page turning sounds in this book. Magic in early Christianity. Here's the Hieronymus Bosch painting. These are always so spooky. Rockland Publishing has this amazing Hieronymus Bosch tarot that opens with like a gatefold. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I'd love to have it. Okay. Northern magic. Yeah, this is exciting for me. This is the chapter that I was like the most looking forward to. Okay, so this is section 3 on Northern magic. And this one, as you can see, has a depiction of Stonehenge. And it says, I love the way that this book is written, it's so good. While the occult sciences flourished in the warm climates of the Mediterranean and Near East, in the distant north of Europe, something else was happening. There, the Celts and later the Germanic people of Scandinavia were developing their own brand of magic and ritual, one typically close to nature and rooted in the hostile landscape. One of the earliest monuments to this kind of magical thinking was Stonehenge in the southwest of England. Built between the 3rd and 1st millennium BC, it has been associated with sun worship, healing, and druidical rituals. But who were the Druids? The mainstays of religion and ritual in Iron Age Britain and France. They are known mostly through the attempts of Romans and Greeks to understand their culture. The earliest description of a Druid comes from Julius Caesar's accounts of the conquest of the British Isles. We've got all sorts of images here. Siegfried, the heroes of Germanic mythology, was made invincible by being bathed in dragon's blood. And here's a section on Celtic magic. Some nice illustrations. And some stuff on divination as well, which is the art of seeing into the future using supernatural means. It is the oldest form of magic, as well as the most widely practiced. Although it takes many different forms, it can be broadly divided into 2 categories: clairvoyancy and omen interpretation. Mid-19th century Persian chart, a divination bowl, and look at this Druids page. Among the Celtic peoples of Gaul, Britain, Ireland, and possibly elsewhere during the Iron Age, a Druid was a member of the educated professional class. They are most commonly referred to as religious leaders, although their numbers also included poets and doctors. Very little is known about the ancient Druids. They left no written accounts of themselves, and the only evidence for their existence is the few descriptions left by Greek, Roman, and various other authors and artists, as well as stories created by later medieval writers. And so there's lots of stuff about the archaeology of Druids, the proof we have that they existed, early magic, and here's Stonehenge, some stuff about Aleister Crowley. The pyramids of Egypt have long been seen as having magical properties, in part because of their apparent connection to the stars and their geometric underpinnings. Norse and Germanic magic. And this is a Viking locket, which contains the remains of a snake. Such amulets were believed to have magical properties. I'd love to know more about what those magical properties were. Something I find a bit unusual about this book is that they don't source the art in these descriptions. Like, they don't say painted by this person. Like, maybe there's an index at the back, but I just find that a little bit odd. It's beautiful artwork, but like, tell me, what museum these things are held at, or like what they are, who they're by. And stuff about runes, charms, runes, and sigils. And Merlin, this is another very famous Pre-Raphaelite painting, which I absolutely adore. Stuff about the Arthurian legends, The story of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table has become one of the world's best known magical cycles. We've got an injured King Arthur. Lots of beautiful art. And here's medieval magic. The concept of the witch's Sabbath as we now understand it arose in the late Middle Ages. The medieval period in Europe marked the return of a more sophisticated approach to magic. This approach reflected not only an increasingly refined Christian occult tradition, but also a growing awareness of the early Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and alchemical traditions, as well as the work of the Greek philosophers, which had been largely lost in the preceding centuries. Where did these lost ideas reemerge from? Alchemy, in particular, was highly dependent on Arabic works, which were a mixture of translations of earlier classical texts. This 19th century mural, microcosm and macrocosm, as above, so below, is the fundamental tenet of Hermeticism. It is also the rational basis for much of the magic that seeks to influence human affairs through interaction with the higher plane. I have a pin that says, as above, so below. Think of that often. Magical shapes and symbols talks about how symbols and shapes are an important part of understanding. The pentagram, circles are important magical shapes. Shown opposite are a series of symbols for invoking the spirit Berto, Agares, Balfaros, and Vasiago. And you see the circle a lot in alchemy and practical magic, as it notes Albertus Magnus. Oh, very scary demonology pictures. Very, very frightening. Let's keep on moving. The persecution of magic. So it moves into, like the laws governing magical bodies and magical practices. The very first anti-magic laws can be found in the Code of Hammurabi, a law code set down in Babylonia. In the 2nd millennium BC, the law states that if someone is found to have cast a spell, they must immerse themselves in the holy river to prove their innocence. Les Druides Brûlés. Grimoires, isn't this an amazing book? It has a little bit of everything. A grimoire, generally speaking, is a book of spells. More specifically, however, it can also consist of tracts on how to summon demons. The best known grimoires include the Sworn Book of Honorius, the Munich Manual of Demonic Magic, and the Grand Grimoire. The origins of each is at best obscure, although in many cases it is obvious that they share common yet lost ancestors. Supposedly written by Honorius of Thebes, the Sworn Book of Honorius is one of the oldest grimoires. The earliest manuscript version dates from the 14th century and was once owned by John Dee. However, the first printed copy of the book did not appear until 1629. The Picatrix is another well-known grimoire. It's written in Arabic. It's a famous one, probably in the 11th century, though possibly earlier. It includes spells and potions designed to aid the magician, astrological information, and philosophical passages. It had an influence on the Renaissance figures of Marsilio Ficino and Agrippa, and is famous for the wide range of unusual ingredients. There's all sorts of things there. Lots on symbolism and grimoires. There's a ton of really engaging, interesting, accurate information. Here's 2 pages from an 18th century Cyprianus The left-hand page shows the Archangel Metatron, surrounded by alchemical symbols. The right-hand page shows the seal of Aprobata. We have a section on medicine and magic. This is just such a great book. I love it so much. It's like almost 400 pages, which is crazy. It notes something really important. It says up until the end of the Middle Ages, it was difficult to tell the difference between medicine and magic. Treatments revolved around herbs, or else tackled a perceived imbalance in the four humors. Doctors also drew heavily on astrology, as is clear from this extract from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. With us there was a doctor of physique. In all this world ne was there nunum like, to speak of physic and of surgery, for he was grounded in astronomy. He kept his patient a full great deal in hours by his magic natural. And this is a copy of the Physician's Handbook, English Medical and Astrological Compendium. And above, this is an allegory for an apothecary, a physician, and surgeon, made from the tools of their trade. The physician is elevated by his learning, while the apothecary balances the alchemist's alembic on his head. Then there's some fun information about magical plants. Plants and herbs have long been a mainstay of magic, whether used in potions or for ritual. Deadly nightshade was associated with the Greek goddess Circe, while branches of hawthorn were used by Romans to ward off witchcraft, and by Serbs and Croats to kill vampires. A later legend, garlic was used for the same purpose. Mistletoe and oak trees, as we saw earlier, were sacred to the Druids. Some plants used in magic, such as the moly, are eaten by Odysseus to protect him from Circe's witchcraft, may not have even existed. Oh, this is neat. So above, plucking mandrake at a distance with the aid of string, and then opposite, an illustration of mandrake from a medieval Arabic manuscript. Yeah, and there's like these gorgeous illustrations of mandrake root, beautifully preserved from medieval manuscripts, which is just magical. It says one plant in particular has always been considered especially magical, the mandrake. In part, this is because its roots look uncannily like a human, and in the Middle Ages, mandrake root amulets were common. However, it is also because, when ingested, the root causes hallucinations and delirium. The association of the mandrake with witchcraft goes back centuries, with its root sometimes used as a puppet, a figure of a human used in sorcery and witchcraft. When Joan of Arc was charged with witchcraft, for example, her accusers claimed that she carried with her a mandrake root. So, one of these. And then we have a couple more illustrations. The Druids, or the conversion of the Britons to Christianity. Druids harvesting mistletoe. And miraculous, in medieval Europe, distant lands were believed to be home to even more miraculous plants. The famous example is the vegetable lamb of Tartary. And in Norse mythology, the entire world was supported by the tree Yggdrasil. I think that's where we're gonna stop, because this is, as you can see, like a halfway point in the book because of the binding. But I will probably read the entire other half of the book on my Patreon at some point. There's a lot of really good stuff because we're getting into modernity a bit more, which I know excites people a lot. But again, if you enjoyed this, please do subscribe. Consider joining us on Patreon for a lot more readings. I do a ton of reading type videos on my Patreon. That's kind of one of the biggest things I do there. And I hope that you have a restful and peaceful sleep. And I'll see you again very, very soon. Good night.